welcome. Wow. Isaac, what number of Coaching Agile Journeys is this? Like 56?
We're at 56, yes.
So we've been doing this for over 4 years now, and we're so excited that you decided to join us today, and Marcus and Bryce, to share your knowledge about red team thinking, and it's becoming more popular, and glad to be able to present this topic today. So folks are like, what is red team thinking? So hopefully you read the description a little bit, but we know we need to adapt and evolve, and red team thinking is going to help you along that journey, hopefully. So we'll be getting an intro to the tools and techniques of red team thinking, and hopefully you'll walk away with something that you can try, something different, and maybe attend some training coming up. So Coaching Agile Journeys, we do this on our own time and money. So if you feel like donating, head over to our website, coachingagilejourneys.com. And we'd appreciate any kind of donation to keep our tools and website up and running. And without further ado, then I'll pass it on to Bryce and Marcus, so generous to share their time with us today. Thank you so much for coming along.
No, that's great. Thank you. Absolutely. Just let me share my screen for you all. There we go. So thank you for the welcome and introduction, Heidi, and great that you guys have been in this for so long and it's still rolling strong, especially in this day and age, which is fantastic. So we're here today to talk about how do we make better decisions faster in the VUCA world. And if you hadn't heard of VUCA, then all will become clear as we proceed today. And hopefully we're going to show how the concept of red teaming and what we've evolved to red team thinking can help you do that. So my background, quite a checkered past. I had 20 plus years in the military in the Royal Air Force. And throughout that time, I had numerous joint tours. My most highlighted one was with the US Marine Corps over in the States in Arizona. I was there during 2000 to 2003, so there for 9/11, and subsequently deployed out to Iraq wearing a US military uniform, which was sort of early days of my understanding of red teaming. And then beyond that, left the Air Force after 2012, doing the air defense for the Olympics, and then went into consulting. Didn't last very long there. Didn't agree with the ethics of what they were proposing, but did a lot of work with the government, and then moved into doing large scale agile transformations in big banks. So worked for Lloyd's as head of agile for about 3.5 years, and then to Royal Bank of Scotland, and more recently supporting HSBC. And then we've been doing red team thinking with Bryce for the last year. So the time for change, Socrates here, many a great quote, but as he says here, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Now, I think we can all agree that we are in a time of change. That's undisputable. And change is always difficult, predominantly though, for exactly the reason here that the great thinker Socrates is talking about. You know, people can't seem to let go of the old and embrace the new. And it takes time. But as we're seeing, we no longer have time. Another great quote here. Now, it's moving too fast. It is revolution, not evolution. There are many accelerations at once. One of the biggest problems is the difficulty of mankind to cope with it. I don't know whether political leaders or business leaders can easily handle it. So what we're seeing here is a quote from Ian Conn, the CEO of Centrica, which is a major gas utilities organization in the UK, stating that this is no longer the capability of a single super CEO, the ones that we were used to before, the one man leading from the front. Everything's now moving too fast, too rapid, too complex. And at the time this was spoken, this was 2018, the profits for the company were up 415 million. First H1 the year after, they'd lost 984 million. This was 6 months before COVID was even a word in our dictionaries. Con said he would be retiring this summer. He stood down at the beginning of the year. And what we can now start to see before COVID even arrived is the complexity and the speed with which change is happening in the world around us. And obviously then 2020 arrived and everything changed. VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, became a well-known word. And this word has been around since the 1980s. Again, it came from the military US Army College, and it was a buzzword for many execs around the boardrooms for quite a few years, but now it's something we're all very aware of because we've entered an era of unprecedented VUCA right now. This is as real as it gets, and it's impacting everybody. It's not just the frontline market, but the macro economy globally. Everybody's starting to feel the pinch of what's happening. Now, not only the threats coming with this, though, but there are new opportunities out there emerging every day. And this is where red teaming not only helps you identify some of those threats, but also how do you see those opportunities and grasp them and make the most of those positive things that you can really jump on and surf your company through this huge wave of problematic issues with. And all of this is a new norm now. Everyone's talking about when are we going to go back to normal, the new normal. This is it. If this crisis isn't sorting us out, then there'll be another one around the corner. We are now going to be into continuous bow wave after bow wave of complex, volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous problems facing us. This is it. We need to get used to it. So the question is, are we ready to deal with it? Now, the Business Agility Institute, if you've not had a look at this, I suggest you highly recommend logging on. Really useful documentation. They come out once a year with a report, provide lots of really good, challenging information to the industry. And this is what they came up with. So the top 10 things for challenging you trying to do your agile transformation to bring business agility into your organization. Now, 2019's report you see here showed that the leadership, change management, and culture were the top 3. Now, the year before, you may notice their top 10, the comparisons here. We had 2018, 2019, both with leadership as the #1 challenge. Now, when I briefed this, I said, I'll bet you, however much you like, a dinner out in Canary Wharf for a week's salary, that 2020 might just have a very similar response. And funny old thing, the report came out last month from Ewan and the team at the Business Agility Institute, and no prizes for guessing the #1 again. So the 3rd year running, we're still seeing the #1 challenge to achieving agility in your transformation programs being leadership, not the coalface of doing this, not the tools and the technology. So there is a leadership challenge. We're all aware of this. So who wants change? Everybody wants change. We're all aware of the requirement for change. But who physically wants to change? Oh, no, that's someone else. Someone else has to do that. I want it, but I don't want to do it myself because I'm quite happy with what I'm doing. It goes back to what Socrates was saying. And then the worst part, who actually wants to lead this? This is hard stuff. This is something that hasn't really been thought about from a leadership perspective of how you take your organization that wants to change but doesn't want to change. How do you lead them through that? Really, really difficult challenge. So it's not hard to see why we have this problem for 3 years on the run, and obviously many more. Because right now we know that there is an institutionalized command and control culture. Right, that's proven, and we've got plenty of data to show you on that. Although there is a desire to change amongst the executives. When we talk to them, they want to make that difference. They want to change, but they're faced with very old habits that make breaking those habits very difficult. So can we teach an old dog new tricks? Well, we believe we can. And I'm not just making this up. You know, if you look at some of the feedback from this report, directors of the company are subscribing to outdated mentalities. They've not yet taken the steps to make the leadership shifts required. They're still using bureaucracy, processes, and maintaining control. All of the buzzwords that we know are impacting everything we're trying to achieve with a transformational shift. And the data doesn't lie. So again, 20th century bureaucracy. We're still using those old top-down bureaucratic practices, whilst at the coalface, we're trying to use these new evolving techniques. There are major challenges for leadership when they try and shift to agility at the enterprise level. It's very easy to do mechanistic, agile and Scrum and Kanban at the coalface, but when you start to apply that across a huge organization, it's much more complex and difficult than you believe. And as we're now seeing, these things don't happen in the weeks as promised that the consultancies will tell you, not even the months. These are taking years and then still failing. And there are very, very few positive stories about these things coming to fruition. And as we can see here, we have risk-averse cultures. We're still operating in silos. There are layers upon layers of bureaucracy. We have workforce passivity, the zombie Scrum that you'll heard of, people becoming mediocre through lack of failure to try and evolve. And obviously the mindsets are very traditional, and therefore we see a lack of supportive leadership at the top, enabling all of this, creating all of these problems that we see. This is not what people want, but it's what's happening. And it's a real shame because we've been sold all these fantastic new ways of working, Agile, Scrum, XP, Kanban, you know, all evolved from Prince 2 and Waterfall and the mechanistic ways of doing large-scale programs, but they're all failing. And there's some figures on here, but you're looking between 70 and 80% of these large-scale programs are failing. And that number hasn't got any better over the last 5 years. Now, here's the problem. The new ways of working clearly aren't working. What we're seeing though here, we've seen an evolution from 20th century, the process mechanistic ways into the human ways of working in the 20th century, 21st century, but we're not bringing the leadership and the mindset that's evolved with the way the technologies and the processes have as well. All of these new great tools are out there and these new processes and ways of working, and they've been adopted at the coalface. But to do this at enterprise and to have this capability be as effective as it needs to be, it has to be organization wide. Because if you don't, the coalface very quickly starts to break, and we'll discuss that more downrange. And when you attempt to adopt this at the enterprise, then the other way we can do that is by bringing in these large overlays of capability like SAFE that make it look like it's adoptable. What we then start to see is failure. And people start scratching their heads and begin to understand why that problem is. And hopefully we can shed some light on that today. As I said, command and control, more often than not, especially in some of the large organizations, especially in government and banking, where I've had a lot of experience, it's more command and comply. And why is that? It goes back to those old school behaviors I was talking about. There's a fear at the executive level of releasing the reins, of allowing the control that we wish to devolve down to the coalface and give commanders intent so they can do what they need to do and take responsibility and accountability. We fear that, of releasing that capability, because we lack the trust of our people to do this, because they don't know how to do it as well as we do sometimes, or we're just not confident that these new ways of working are the right solution because we've not really seen them validated. And obviously there's a huge inability to delegate down to the next level. When we look about the layers of bureaucracy that we've been seeing, then we start to see 7, 8, 10 layers within these large organizations. It's really difficult to have those reins drop down a level when they're being pulled very tight from the top. And as we've seen, the more risk, the more pressure, the more speed required, the worse these behaviors become, because people revert back to type when you become under pressure because of those reasons. And there's also this obsession with speed. The more complexity we face, the more VUCA our lives become. There seems to be this obsession that we have to go faster through this. We must do, therefore, things quicker. And we believe that technology allows us to do things quicker. And it doesn't. And people are so focused as a metric of focusing on efficiency and velocity and output, rather than understanding the collective holistic view of outcome, along with risk and quality and people and morale and all those aspects that feed into all of your metrics. And as Wyatt Earp said here, fast is fine, but you have to be accurate. You have to be on target with what you're traveling towards at high speed. So we have to do this, but we have to slow down to speed up. We have to take our time, but in a hurry. And if we do that, and if we are able to slow down and think a bit more, then invariably our speed will accelerate downrange instead of going off a cliff at high rate of knots. But there is a new hope. As we said, another famous person turned movie star. Does anybody know where this one came from? We must unlearn what we have learned. Isaac's shaking his head. I'm sure you do, Isaac, and you're going to kick yourself when you see Master Yoda. Unlearn we must. Okay, so what we've seen here, though, is, as important as an agile mindset is for the teams, it's doubly important for the leadership to understand that this agile mindset applies to them as well. Because leaders need to provide the environment. We have to provide the capability, the clarity, and then the control down that chain of command. And if we can devolve the responsibility to the coalface, then we can unlearn those behaviors that kept us pulling the reins, have the confidence and see the autonomy and the accountability happening as our coalface people start taking some responsibility. But if we keep behaving in the way we have, we're never going to be able to do that. So as well as new ways of working, we believe that we need a new way of thinking. So now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Hoffman, who will give us some education on the type of thinking we're talking about.
Thanks, Marcus. Great. Bring up my slides here. All right. Does everyone see that? So let's talk about new ways of thinking. And the new way of thinking that I'd like to talk about is red team thinking. So what is red team thinking and where does it come from? Well, it really begins with this gentleman over on the left here, who is probably the best named Pope in history, Pope Sixtus V, not to be confused with Pope Fiftus VI. And Pope Sixtus V had a very interesting problem. He was the Pope at the beginning of the Renaissance, at the early 1500s, and he had too many saints. And there were new saints being created every year. A lot of new saints, in fact, being created every year. So Pope Sixtus V said, I'm hearing all this talk here in Italy about rational thought and new ways of thinking. So he proposed a really interesting solution to this problem. He said, let us create an office in the Catholic Church. Let's get a priest who is a lawyer to try to argue that all of these candidates for sainthood are not saints at all, that they are in fact blatant self-promoters, that their good deeds were really just self-aggrandizement. Their supposed miracles all had rational scientific explanations. And he called this office the office of the Advocatus Diaboli, the devil's advocate. Now, most people don't realize that this was and is to this day an actual office that exists in the Vatican, and its job is to argue that people who are put forward as candidates for sainthood don't deserve that honor. And can anyone guess what happened when the office of the devil's advocate started its work? Well, the answer is that there became a lot less saints. And the number of new saints being created actually dropped by over 90% and has remained at that level ever since. Because, as I said, the office still exists to this day. In fact, when Mother Teresa was put forward as a candidate for sainthood, the Catholic Church called the famous British atheist Christopher Hitchens to testify against her. He later complained about two things. One, he was unsuccessful and she became a saint. Two, he wasn't paid for his work, so he said he had been forced to represent the devil pro bono. But this is really the first time where we see an organization coming up with a systematic process for challenging its own thinking in a deliberate way. Now, let's jump to Prussia in the late 1790s. The Prussians had a very different problem. They had just been beaten by Napoleon. And if you were a Prussian general, there is no greater humiliation that you could have conceived of than having been defeated on the battlefield by a French corporal. But the Prussians said, we're not going to take this anymore. We're gonna figure out how to take the fight back to Napoleon, and this time we're going to get it right. So to make sure we get it right, we're going to plan our brilliant strategy out. We're going to make sure it's perfect, but we're not going to stop there. We're going to divide our best officers into two groups, and one group is going to be the Prussians, of course, and we're going to execute our strategy on a tabletop exercise. But the other half of our best officers is going to pretend that they are the revolutionary French. And because that's the color of revolutionary France was red, they are going to be the red team. And they are going to do their best to defeat our plan in these exercises. And so that's where the term red teaming comes from. Jumping ahead again to Israel in 1973, the Israelis didn't lose the Yom Kippur War, but they almost did. And the thing that's fascinating about that is they had more advanced warning than any country in the world has probably ever had that they were about to be invaded. And I won't go into all the details. You can ping me offline if you want. It's a fascinating story. But they had cracked the Egyptian and Syrian ciphers. They knew that the invasion was in the offing. They had a mole on the Egyptian general staff who told them the date, the time, and the code name for the invasion. They could see with their reconnaissance flights that the Syrian and Egyptian militaries were massed on their borders, and they could even see that the Egyptians had begun assembling bridges to cross the pontoon bridges to cross the Suez Canal. And yet, despite all of this, they did not mobilize their army. And the reason they didn't mobilize their army is because they believed that they had cracked the Arab code. And when I say crack the code, I don't mean the ciphers, because they had cracked those, but that they had gotten in the mind of their adversary, that they understood their thinking, and that they had correctly predicted so many times in the past 3 years when these moves were just kind of ruses and attempts to get them to get back to the negotiating table, that they said, we know this pattern, we know what this looks like, and they were not going to fall for it this time. And so they became victims of their own success. They became victims of their own successful thinking, successful strategies, which is a really important concept for businesses, because success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds arrogance. And so after they almost lost that war, the Israelis set up a group within their military intelligence directorate called Ipsa Sabra, which is Aramaic for on the contrary, the opposite may be true. And its job, it continues to this day, is to take whatever the prevailing thinking, the prevailing conclusions of Israeli military intelligence are, and argue that they're wrong. Try to poke holes in them. Argue that the Israeli strategies are misguided. Now, that's not because they may be perfect. They may be perfectly correct, but the idea is that by deliberately challenging them, they make them better. They find the flaws in them, and they buttress their own thinking. So the US also had a failure of intelligence on 9/11. And on September 12th, 2001, as they were still pulling people from the ruins of the World Trade Center in the Pentagon, CIA Director George Tenet reactivated, in my book I say stood up, but I've since learned from folks who were there that he reactivated an organization within the CIA called the Red Cell. And the Red Cell's job was very much like the Israeli organization. Its job was to take the prevailing thinking of the CIA and to stress test it, to deliberately challenge it. But what made it even better than the Israeli model is the CIA had developed a whole series of tools and techniques to do this in an intentional and structured way that were very powerful. Now, obviously, the work of the Red Cell is deeply classified, but two things that we can say about it that are public. One is the CIA, and you can go to their website and look this up. They say this on their website. The Red Cell has been responsible for having thwarted at least half a dozen major terrorist attacks on the United States since 9/11 that would have been equal to or significantly larger than the September 11th terrorist attack. So that's one thing. The other thing is that starting a few weeks after it was stood up, the Red Cell started creating a document every day called the Alternative Intelligence Assessment. It was a one-page document. So for those who don't know, the President of the United States every day gets a little black book with 6 or 7 pages in it that's called the Daily Intelligence Briefing, Daily Intelligence Assessment. And it's a collection of all the intelligence that's been gathered in the past 24 hours by US spy agencies, an analysis of what it means, what opportunities and threats it poses to the United States, and what options the president may wish to consider as a result of this. So the Red Cell started producing this appendix to this document in which it said, Mr. President, everything you've read may be wrong. If it's wrong, here's some other ways that you could interpret this same information. Here are some other options that you may wish to consider. So it's interesting to note that both President Bush and President Obama both said publicly many times that they found the Alternative Intelligence Assessment to be one of the most important documents that they looked at every day. 2 weeks after he was elected president, President Trump said that he found it to be confusing and asked that it be removed from his briefing. So he no longer sees it. The CIA still prepares it. They just don't give it to the president. They use it internally. So the final step on our journey here of where red team thinking comes from is the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that then ensued from 9/11. And the thing about both of these conflicts is that they both seemed initially to be very easy victories for the United States. However, by 24, they were looking a lot more like inescapable quagmires. So a new head of the US Army was appointed. And the first thing that he did, General Schoomaker, was to create a lessons learned team to figure out what had gone wrong. How had we made these mistakes that led to the current situation that then existed in the Middle East? And what they quickly concluded was a big contributor to the problems we were dealing with was that we had not, as a military and as a country, challenged our own assumptions. So we'd made a lot of bad assumptions, that there was a lot of faulty thoughts in our thinking. We had not considered how our actions might affect other stakeholders and things like this. And so, long story short, is he created a group called the University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies, or Red Teaming University, and he took some of the tools from the CIA and other sources and created this formal process called red teaming, where the military was going to deliberately, if I can advance my slide here, there we are. Deliberately challenge its own thinking. And that's really what this concept of red teaming is about, is having this process for deliberately challenging the organization's own assumptions, its own conclusions, and its own plans and strategies. So when I heard about this, I thought, wow, businesses could really benefit from this too. So in 2015, I convinced the US military to let me become the first, and now only, because the school was just shut down last week, civilian from outside government to go through the US Army's Red Team Leader course at Fort Leavenworth. This is our graduation day. You can tell who I am because I'm the only person who didn't get the memo we were supposed to wear green to graduation. And I spent the first half of 2015 studying this with the US Army. Then I also continued to learn about it from the British military, which had adopted this similar program, from the New Zealand Defense Forces, from the CIA, and others that are using this. And in 2017, I published the book Red Teaming: how your business can conquer the competition by challenging everything. And what my book is an attempt to port these ideas to business. And the thing is that as we've done that, we've learned some important things. And the most important thing, the reason I wrote the book is because of this. Most businesses die from self-inflicted wounds. It's a really important thing to recognize. Most businesses die from self-inflicted wounds. So if you look at the logos over here on the right, we won't go over all of them, but these are companies that most people think, oh, you know, they were put out of business by a new competitor, by a new technology. But let's take Kodak, for example. Okay. Kodak, most people think was put out of business by digital photography, right? Okay. Here's the problem with that. Kodak actually invented the digital camera. They literally invented the digital camera, patented the first digital camera, and then made a decision as an organization. And after they went bankrupt, you can go and look at their bankruptcy filings and all the corporate documents that were released during their bankruptcy hearings and see this in print. They had a conversation as a senior leadership team that went something like this. This digital camera is a really cool idea, but here's the problem. Are we a camera company or are we a film company? Really, we're a chemical company. We make chemicals to develop film. We make film that's based on chemicals, and we make chemically treated paper that you put print pictures on. So really, what's the point of this digital photography? Let's not get distracted by this digital photography thing. And they went out of business. And we could go on and on this list, but the point that I want to make is that most companies are not put out of business by a competitor or a new technology. That may be the catalyst, but they still have a choice. They still have a choice. And strategy is about making choices. And red team thinking is about making better choices. So why do we need new ways of thinking to make better choices? Well, because Adam Smith was wrong. So for 300 years almost, people have assumed that Adam Smith figured it out, that human beings make fundamentally rational decisions. And that if they make bad decisions, it's only because of one of two things is happening. Either they're being swayed by strong emotions, or they have incomplete information. And so the solution is give people better information and they'll make better decisions. Here's the problem with that, is that that's not actually how people make decisions. That's how we wish we made decisions. Because in the past 45 years, scientists like Dr. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning cognitive psychologist, and his colleague Amos Tversky and several dozen other researchers have proven in literally thousands of experiments that the way that people make decisions is actually skewed by a dizzying array of cognitive biases, blind spots, heuristics that affect our thinking, affect our decision-making in ways that we're not even aware of. Now, I'm obviously not going to go through this whole list, but let me just touch on a few to give you an example of what I mean. So affect heuristic is one important one. So affect heuristic is our tendency to give more weight to emotionally charged information, whether it's positive or negative. So for instance, this is what allowed in the United States, at least, or North America, at least, cigarette companies to continue to be able to successfully market cigarettes with these big billboards with a cowboy lighting up at the end of a trail ride because their target customer had such a positive association with that image that they were paying more attention to the cowboy saying, I love a good Marlboro at the end of the day, than they were to the sign on the bottom of the chart that said, Surgeon General's warning, these cigarettes can kill you in brutal and horrific ways. A more recent example, going back to 9/11, is that there were more people killed in the United States because they decided to drive in the 6 months after 9/11 because they were afraid of terrorism than were actually killed in the terrorist attacks on 9/11. So the way scientists were able to figure this out is they looked at the highway fatality rate in the United States for the previous 10 years. They averaged the rate for those 6 months. And then they were able to look at the increase in that rate proportionate to the decrease in people flying domestically in the United States and correlate that. And they were able to find that over 1,000 more people died because they made the decision to drive instead of fly, even though most of us know that driving is much less safe than flying, even with terrorism factored in. But the strong negative charge of the recent terrorist attacks overcame that knowledge, overcame that rational thought. in some people who are very intelligent. Now, this does not just affect individuals, it affects organizations too. So you may remember Polaroid was up on my list before. So Polaroid is a great example of a cognitive bias called loss aversion. So we are all hardwired to prefer to keep something we already have than to get something that is better than what we already have if there's a risk that we might lose what we already have. And so that affects individuals, but it affects corporations too. So Polaroid, another company that most people think was put out of business by digital photography. Again, there's a problem with that story. And the problem in Polaroid's case is that in the early to mid 1990s, Polaroid actually had one of the best-selling consumer digital cameras in North America. But, and again, we know this from the company's bankruptcy filings, they had a meeting of their senior leadership team where they had a discussion that went like this. Our new digital photography business is growing phenomenally. Every quarter, it's double-digit growth. It's a huge new market. But here's the thing. We're making like 20, 25% margins on these digital cameras that we're selling. But we make 77% margin on our film business. And do we really, the thing is the more digital cameras we sell, the less film we sell. So, gosh, I know we're making a lot of money on these digital cameras and it's growing, but do we really want to give up this film business, which is it's just such a great return on investment? And they made the decision to kill their digital photography business and double down on their film business. And that's how they went out of business. So the last one I'll touch on here, optimism bias. This is a really important one because what it is about is that all of us, to some degree or another, tend to overestimate our abilities, underestimate our shortcomings, and this is the most important thing, exaggerate our ability to accurately predict the future. So here's a fun fact. 93% of Americans believe they are, quote, above average drivers. Now, you may look at that and say, well, 93% of Americans don't understand how statistics work, clearly. But here's the thing. They did a similar survey of academics around the world, and they found that 70% of college professors believe they are above average college professors, including professors of statistics who should know better. And so that's the problem, is we can't get outside of these things. We're not aware of them is the problem. Now, all of these things, that's an important point. All of these things have a reason for existing. They're not flaws in our code. They're not glitches in our matrix. What they are is this, they have useful skills. So let's take optimism bias. Optimism bias, for example, Daniel Kahneman calls optimism bias the engine of capitalism. Because if we didn't have optimism bias, nobody would become an entrepreneur. Nobody would start a restaurant. Nobody would start a business. Most people who are intelligent enough to try to get the capital together to start a restaurant have heard the statistic in the United States that 9 out of 10 restaurants will close within 3 years of opening. That is a hard and fast statistic. It's widely published. And yet every year, thousands and thousands of people start new restaurants. And they've done surveys that say that most people who start restaurants are aware of that statistic, and fully a third of people who start restaurants put their chances of failure at 0. 0. Not even 1%, 0. So most of those people will fail. But here's the thing. Those that don't change the world. Those that don't create tremendous wealth. Those that don't create jobs and move society forward. And so without optimism bias, we would probably still be living in hunter-gatherer communities. The problem comes in when we start dealing with complex problems, and these biases still impact our thinking and we're not aware that we're doing it. So the problem is compounded then when you put people in large organizations, because then all of these biases kind of there becomes an echo chamber where they all magnify each other. And then you get a whole other set of pathologies that affect decision-making, things like groupthink, satisficing, the Abilene paradox, internal politics, and careerism. So how does red team thinking help? Well, red team thinking offers tools to counter these unconscious biases and techniques to surface alternative perspectives. So the idea is to find as many ideas as possible and make sure that the best idea wins, to move from divergent thinking to convergent thinking. It also forces you to challenge your own assumptions, and it leverages the wisdom of the group to overcome the blind spots of the individual. So the important thing to remember about it, though, is it's both a mindset and a methodology. So there are tools and techniques, but having this kind of critical, constructive, contrarian mindset is really what we try to cultivate in people. And how do we do it? Well, we have an array of tools and techniques. I'm not going to go through them all, but I just want to give you a sample of what they look like. So we have a group of tools and techniques that we call analytical techniques that include things like 6 strategic questions, which is a tool, very simple tool that you can do in like half an hour that's designed to help ensure that your strategy is solving the right problem and will lead to the right outcome. And assumptions challenge, which is a very systematic way of identifying the underlying assumptions of your plan or strategy and then stress testing those. We have another group of techniques we call imaginative techniques, and those include things like pre-mortem analysis, which you may have heard of, which looks at the ways that a plan could go wrong so that you can make sure that it doesn't. And a tool that we developed called Swan Dive, which is designed to explore the consequences of a future event on your strategy or plan, as well as the steps that would lead to it occurring. And then finally, we have a whole bunch of contrarian techniques. My favorite is one that we developed called Devil's Troika, which is basically a structured way of doing devil's advocacy. And a really fun one we call the enemy within, which is designed to expose the things an organization is doing to defeat itself. Always very eye-opening. The key thing around all of these techniques, though, is that they're tools. They're not a checklist. They're not a roadmap. There's not a red teaming process. That's why we evolved from formal red teaming, which the military intelligence communities developed, to red team thinking, which is a practice. What is the difference between a practice and a process? A process is something that's a series of steps. You do step 1, you check that off. You do step 2, you check that off. You do step 3, you check that off. And when you get to the end of the process, then you're done. You make your decision and you move on to the next one. And it usually looks something like this. You study the problem, you satisfice. For those who don't know, satisficing means working until you find the first viable solution. Then you sell that solution, and then you execute. Okay? Here's the problem with that. Marcus talked about the VUCA world. In this VUCA world, by the time you get to the execution phase, the problem has changed. The world has changed, and you're still trying to sell the plan that you developed days, weeks, months ago without recalibrating it. And when you're done, you're done. And the other problem with this is that those steps often just become check boxes where you just say, did we do this? Yes, we did this, without really doing it. So what a practice looks like, what our practice looks like is this. You start by trying to understand the problem. To seek understanding is the first step of the leader. My mentor is former Ford and Boeing CEO, Alan Mulally. This is one of his mantras, is seek understanding before seeking to be understood. Then you analyze it. Then you decide on a solution. And then you act, but you don't stop there. Because once you act, then you seek to understand how your actions are being executed in the market. Are they achieving the desired goal, or has the situation changed? And then you analyze that and you calibrate, you decide again, and then you act again. And it becomes this virtuous circle moving through this practice of decision making. And the thing is if you get a lot of people, this goes to what Marcus was talking about in terms of leadership. If you have leaders who are trained in these tools and techniques, they don't need to have a decision retreat. They don't need to have a strategy day. They just do these things as a matter of course, and they make better decisions faster. That's what red team thinking is all about. And as Marcus said, it's needed more than ever, because in this VUCA world, it's all about resiliency. And people talk a lot about emotional resiliency, and that's very important, obviously, for leaders. But cognitive resiliency is also important. New ways of thinking, as Marcus talked about, but also strategic resiliency, developing plans that have optionality baked into them so that when things happen, when the world becomes throws you a curveball, which it does every day now, you don't panic because you have an array of options already developed that you know you're going to use one of those options, that you're going to analyze it again to make sure that was the right one, calibrate as necessary. So this is what we're really aiming at, is these 3 levels of resiliency. So how can you use this to make better decisions in the VUCA world? I'm just going to go through this really quick because I want to turn this back over to Marcus. 1, ask your team 3 questions. What should we be doing that we're not? What are we doing that we should stop? And what should we double down on right now? Because this is the thing. We like to say that we're unconsultants, because consultants, you hire a consultant, they come in and they tell you the answer. We don't tell anybody any answers. We believe every organization has the answers it needs within itself. What it needs is tools, techniques, and leadership to surface those answers and to clear the way for them to move forward. 2, examine your assumptions. Ask your team to come up with a list of the assumptions your plan is based on, both stated and unstated. And then ask, how confident are we that each of these assumptions will prove true? And which of these pose the biggest risk to our success? Then spend a lot of time looking at those ones that pose a risk to your success, that you are not confident will prove true. And then finally, or not finally, but number 3, contemplate failure. Ask yourself, what is the worst that could happen? What are the things that could lead to that happening? And what could we do right now to make sure that that doesn't happen? So back to Marcus.
Thanks, Bryce.
Sure.
Excellent canter through there, the history of red teaming. Love it. So hopefully now we're starting to see why we need a new way of thinking. So therefore, accompanying that, we're hopefully going to have a new way of leading, because as we've proven with the history of the last 3 years, and obviously going from before that, we now see that leadership and the changes in the ways of leading is required. So now hopefully, who wants to lead the change? When we ask that question, people with these tools and capabilities are now going to be hopefully taking the lead and putting their hands up to do this, because they're now confident in the capabilities that they have to lead these required changes. Because we have to, as I said at the beginning, time is running out. We don't have time anymore. We gave this presentation a couple of weeks ago with our team, and by the time we'd finished discussing it, we had 35 additional bullet points on why businesses are failing today. So I'm creating some big sort of pyramid with all these things in there, but this just gives you an idea of the many, many reasons. And I briefed this to a scaling up session earlier this year with some startup companies, and just really explaining to them what's going to trip them up as they go down range. And a lot of these were already visible in small startups, not just big organizations, but even small businesses start to see these issues as they start to grow. And if you think they're a problem now, as we said, VUCA is going to 10x this, 20x this. It's just going to get bigger, faster, nastier, more. So understanding that, understanding the choices that we have to make and how quickly we can make them, and the right decisions at the right speed is critical. So why are transformations failing? Talked about 20th to 21st century. You know, we used to be really good at understanding the why, our purpose, why we're here, the clarity. Then the what, understanding the strategy and planning and the plans. And those who are executing, you know, plans are nothing, planning is everything, as Eisenhower said. You know, those who are executing need to be involved in the planning. If you give somebody a plan to execute and they're not been involved in the planning, when it starts to fail, they can't pivot, they can't stop, rethink, and focus. They have to come all the way back to you. So we get that devolved responsibility failing because they can't execute. And then there's the how, the execution. But what we're seeing is a new ways of working. It's sort of selling, and oh, yeah, hey, you don't need all that wild old school stuff, right? Just go straight into experimentation at the coalface. Yeah, test and learn, fail fast. That's great when you're in a garage with your mates building cool stuff. But when you're in a large organization doing multi-million/billion-dollar projects, there's no time to fail. There's no error for failure because they cost you millions. Yes, we can test and learn quickly, but you can't fail at the scale that some of these things are causing. And this is what we've seen. So what we're doing is missing out the real quality of what allows plans to succeed in the why and the what. When we talk to executives, most of them can't tell you what their vision is. When you find a strategy, it's written on the back of a napkin. It's the one-line strapline of the business. There's no real depth or quality to what the intent is or simplicity of understanding. And this is a leadership responsibility. This is where they have to put their piece into the pie rather than just offload that to the front end. And if you do all this way, invariably what you're going to see is a 20% success rate, which matches the 80% failure rate of the new ways of working. So it's not surprising that by missing out all this real upfront quality stuff that we've all done really well in the past, we've almost thrown the baby out with the bathwater with these new ways of working. And therefore, when you do start to see failure, what do? We send audit into execution and they take the lid off of all the agile coalface teams and blame them. And then we hear that, hey, agile's failing. It's this nonsense new thing that we're trying to do. And it's broken because you guys at the coalface don't know how to affect that. We've all been there, we've all seen this, where the problem actually is back here. And when we do end-to-end deep dives of organizations, we can look at I call it the Victorian plumbing, the pipe work running through the company. And this goes back to the flow we were talking about earlier. You see that all the blockages, all the rusty taps and pipes are all up front. They're not at the coalface where the new boiler is. It's back end where that proper strategic thought and planning should have been done and has been overlooked. As I mentioned here, as Blackadder would say, planning is not a dirty word. But Benjamin Franklin said this as well. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And again, people see planning as these, months and months of planning. It's not required to take months. You can do this in days, weeks at the most, given the scale of some of these large-scale strategies and plans that are needed. Michael Porter, Bryce mentioned this. Strategy is about making choices, trade-offs. You can't do everything. We are restricted by budget, people, time, resources. But the underlying principles of strategy are enduring. If you're changing your strategy every month, you don't have a strategy. You have a weak plan. You've got to have a baseline strategy that allows you to continue and be understood throughout. Bryce, do you want to talk about the very simple Allen strategy at Ford?
Yeah, so when Alan Mullally came in 2006 to take over as CEO of Ford Motor Company, he had a 4-point strategy to turn the company around. Produce cars and trucks our customers want and value, work together effectively as one team, finance the plan, and I'm missing one here. Restructure the company to operate profitably at whatever the value, the volume and model mix is. So these are this is 4 points, right? Very simple. So when I share that with people, most people say, well, that's the summary, right, of the strategy. No, that was the entire strategy. That's what he presented to the board of directors. And those seem like really simple things. But at Ford, they were very radical because the company was not making products that people wanted and valued. It was making cars and trucks that either the bean counters were approving or that they had to, because of their union contracts, continue to produce cars even if they weren't selling them. It was not structured to operate profitably at the current volume. The company still had the manufacturing capacity that it had when it had over 25% of the US car market, even though it now had less than 15. The senior executives didn't work together as effectively as one team. They didn't have any money. So his strategy was that 4 points. And that was the strategy that he had the day that he left the company, having turned it from the brink of bankruptcy to one of the most profitable automakers in the world 8 years later. And so the idea is having a simple strategy allows everyone to understand where they can help, where they can put their shoulder to the flywheel, their place in it. And it provides that clarity so that you adapt the tactics to achieve those goals as the world changes, but you don't change the goals themselves.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bryce. And again, therefore, regardless of what changes, the technology, the pace of change around you, that strategy stands core throughout. And so many people focus on technology, process, people, rather than people, process, technology. The technology has become the driver for everything we do where it shouldn't be, because that is causing us to change strategy when it means you should actually be changing your plans and tactics. So if we apply the decision-making practice that Bryce spoke about here and use this cycle, and as we do in Agile, this is an iteration. It's constantly going around the loop and between each one of these different phases and applying the red team thinking tools and concepts as a practice, as something that we're doing by default. And we're allowing that to be done at the coalface by the lowest possible common denominator. then you're going to get much more accountability at the coalface and rapid response to the decisions that you're having to make in the VUCA world as things are changing rapidly. So we need to think differently. So if we apply new ways of thinking at the start and we understand the vision and bring everyone in, if we apply that red team thinking concept throughout the different stages and phases and iterate throughout, this is circular, not linear, then what we create is what I call the red thread. So you now have clarity of understanding about the purpose, why we're here, what we're trying to achieve. And I know that I'm doing something at the coalface and how it links all the way back up through my OKRs, my KPIs, to my visions, goals, objectives, mission, to the vision of the business. And if you have that, you start to get an organization that is fluid and flowing, because people get the reason why they're getting out of bed in the morning, and they're excited and they want to be there and they want to do this because they see it, they sense it, they feel it. And when you're in an organization like that, you walk in, you sense the culture as you walk in the door. Others, you walk in and the zombies are attacking you before you got to the first staircase. So really something to understand. And if you do that, then your chances of success are going to increase to 80% versus the 20%. So in summary, we realize there is a time for change. Little has changed in the thoughts of Socrates from years ago. VUCA is now the new normal, and it's going to continue crisis after crisis. Leadership is the key differentiator. It's not another new tool. It's not another piece of technology. Stop blaming the coalface. We have to understand how the pyramid is affecting the baseline. We need to focus on people first. People, people, people. If you want to forget anything, forget process and technology. Focus on your people. Allow them to adopt practices that work for them, and allow them to be clear on what you're trying to achieve and capable of delivering it. And therefore, you get accountability and control where it needs to be. And we do that by thinking differently. Thinking like we did in the last century isn't going to keep us alive in the 21st century. Because most people would rather die than think. Many do. Thank you. I promise we'd finish in time for questions. There you go, Heidi. How's that?
I have a question that's been burning in my mind, and I'm wondering whether anyone else has this question, because I love and we use this term at my place of work too, if I get the coal face. So that resonated with me, and of course that's what we believe. And my one thought was, some leaders just aren't on board with getting folks involved at the coal face. And how do you, are there strategies that have been successful for you in the past to help them understand that, you know, this is actually really important to get everybody involved?
Marcus?
Yeah, sure. So as we try to educate people, you know, these are team efforts. And if we have a problem that needs solving, or if they have a strategy or plan that needs looking at, if you have all the leadership in the room with you using the red team thinking tools, you're not going to get the diversity of thought that you need. So when we're working with clients, we help educate them on the structure of the team that, you know, we expect when we arrive, to help them take the plan through. And that invariably means different layers, different roles, different capabilities, different countries and backgrounds. So you start to see the value of questioning from the coalface and all levels in between. And also the dilution that you don't have if you've got the same groups of people who are thinking the same. So it really is using the examples we've got today about why these things aren't working. If you wish to want to carry on doing it that way, that's fine. But we can evidence, if we do take you through the tooling, that the outcome won't be as effective and diverse as if you've used those different layers below you and where you should be. And also, a great post by Bryce this week, you know, why are you paying your consultants more than you're paying your executives? You know, the answers lie within your organization. And even if you as an executive board don't know the answers, I can go out and find them for you, because that's what consultants will do. They will come in and spend a week walking around with a questionnaire, asking all your amazing people all the questions that you need answers to. They're all there. Open the door, go to the Gemba, as we say in Toyota world. Go and talk to the people out there, what they're doing, understand, ask the right questions, and amazingly, those answers will start to surface.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Do we have time maybe for one more question? If there's any more questions out there, you can put it in the chat. You can unmute and ask it real quick. Just give a second to see if there's any wrapping up questions. Managing by one round.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Come on.
So few don't.
Yeah, go and see. That's the way that I prefer to translate it, is go and see for yourself. You know,
So I'm curious.
The fundamental thing that, just on that point, I mean, you know, the fundamental thing, as Mark says, is don't outsource thinking. You know, if you look at it, I mean, I will pull this back to 30,000 feet. I think a lot of the problems that we're dealing with, not just in business, but in society right now, are because most people have abdicated the role of thinker. Most people have given up thinking for themselves and let other people think for them. And that can be as simple as somebody sitting glued to their television, watching, you know, the same channel over and over again, you know, reinforcing their beliefs without hearing anything that challenges it. But it also happens in businesses too, with leaders who just pay a consultant to come and tell them, you know, the same answer. And Marcus has a great story about one of our clients that he was working with, where he had worked at a company where they brought in the same consultant years before. And this company brought in a consultant. We didn't know who it was, but when he said, as soon as they started telling what the plan was, he says, I can tell you what's on page 48 of that document. And they're like, how could you do that? He says, because I saw the same thing 3 years ago. Because that's what these
different acronym.
Yeah. They just regurgitate it, but it all comes down to abdicating the role of thinker. If people just think for themselves, and if they think for themselves in a group, that's really powerful.
Yeah, I love that concept in one of your slides, the WOT, right? Let's look at our thinking, right? Let's not just fix that or fix that. It's bigger than that. Let's shift. So wonderful. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for that content. That was wonderful content, opening up our minds for thinking. Do you have, I see your links there in internetredteamthinking.com. That's a place if people want to connect with y'all, do some training, get more information on this, best place they can go there.
Absolutely, Isaac. Hope to see you all there.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
And that's the upcoming courses. If anyone's interested, our second round of these kicks off in December. So more than welcome to come along, and more information on the website, or just drop us a line. Always happy for a Zoom chat and a good coffee over this stuff. It's fascinating talk.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for sharing. For the rest of you, we will have the recording of this session up on coachingagilejourneys.com. We want to invite you over there to check it out. Also, just by way of a heads up, we are going to be sending out here pretty soon as we wrap up our year. We have a couple more events that you can see on coachingagilejourneys.com. But as we wrap up 2020, we're going to start looking forward to 2021. So you'll be seeing a survey come out, new topics. We'll be asking you for ways we can improve the session. So do connect with us. And speaking of that, we also just set up a LinkedIn page, so you can connect with us there on LinkedIn. Heidi dropped it in the chat before. We would love for some of your ways of thinking to help us improve how we deliver content and upcoming sessions. So we want to improve year over year. And so we invite you to join us in that process. And if you have any other great speakers you'd recommend that we could bring for our audience, please shoot us a line out there. So connect with us on our website or at our LinkedIn page. But guys, just again, a big thank you from all of us. I see in the chat, it's a lot of thank yous. This has been great content. I look forward to all of us evolving our way of thinking so we can be effective in the year to come. Hopefully 2021 we know it'll be VUCA, but hopefully we'll be able to approach it with some more tools and be ready for the changes as they come. So, all right, well, we'll sign off here. For Heidi, for John, for myself, Coaching Agile Journeys Group, thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you guys at a future event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Isaac. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. Bryce and Marcus, if you want to send the slides, people were asking for them. That'd be really awesome if you do end up not minding to share those.
We're happy to have you guys put the recording up, but we don't share our slides as a rule.
Okay.
Just had some bad experiences on that front.
I totally understand. No worries. Yeah, cool. It was really enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you having us. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.